Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate chamber, 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 signed, Senate chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. signed, Senate chamber, 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 signed, Senate chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. signed, Senate chamber, 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 signed, Senate chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. signed, Senate chamber, 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 signed, Senate chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. signed, Senate chamber, 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 signed, Senate chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber. Sound.
Right, okay.
Still spinning. Do we tune for that? That's us now.
Okay. So, members, welcome to the 66th meeting of the Committee for Finance in 22 to 27 mandate. We, as always, do put your phone on silent or airplane mode if you're joining us here in person. Committee meeting is, as always, recorded and broadcast. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We have apologies from Dr. Steve Aiken. We have
Owen Tennyson.
and Owen Tennyson. Okay. And we have some other members joining us via Zoom. Who are there. Thank you, guys. Agenda item 2, declaration of interests. At the beginning of meetings, members are obliged to declare any relevant or other financial interest. Have any members any relevant interest you wish to declare? No? Okay. Agenda item 3 is chairperson's business. First item of chairperson's business is, I actually was going to use it to talk about the budget now. Should we do that now? Can we do
that now? Yeah.
So members, obviously we have hot off the press. It's not quite as hot as it should have been because the OPR published it an hour before they were supposed to. Obviously the UK budget has been published. There's some headline numbers as relates to Northern Ireland. Most pertinent one is the £370 million additional that is across the scorecard period. There are other measures that will affect here. I won't go through them all. Obviously, people will be able to read and see the coverage. One particular one that stands out for me personally is the abolition of the two-child limit, which I think is wholly welcome, and we hope and assume that the Communities Minister and the Executive will be implementing that, and presuming they will be getting the full, they will be maintaining parity, and they will be getting the relevant ability to proceed with that here.
Chair, the Executive had been paying a mitigation therefore that mitigation will no longer be necessary. So it will be money going back into the executive's coffers.
So, okay, so were they paying a mitigation on two child? I don't think we were paying a mitigation on two child.
There was something else that
There
has
was
changed.
the benefit cap.
The benefit cap.
It might actually affect then the amount of money being paid out, because the benefit cap, it will mean that more people are entitled to more. So if the benefit cap comes into play,
Rather than discuss it all now, we'll get the briefing from the department. The upshot of all this is that we're going to get
it's good news about the
the two child limit is really important. So obviously we hope that will be ruled and assume that will be ruled out here. It's devolved, but we, in nearly all cases, other than the areas where we mitigate, we maintain parity in benefits. So hope that's ruled out. The other areas is, say, £370 million, which I believe is resource across the scorecard period, but we will find out more. There's also an announcement of additional funding. I'm not sure whether it's part of the 370 or not. We don't know. We'll find out for an investment zone in Northern Ireland. So those are the bits and pieces we have so far. We will be asking for a detailed briefing from the department. Ideally, they'll be able to give us that next week. But before then, we assume and expect the Finance Minister will say more to the Assembly about the outworkings of the UK budget. And obviously, we would assume and expect that this will enable the Finance Minister and the Executive to conclude the multi-year budget before the end of the year, and ideally while the Assembly is still sitting. Anybody else wish to come in? No? Brian Kingston?
Yeah, well, just to concur with the comments on 370 million and the removal of the two-child limit and universal credit. And just, I do want to welcome too that action taken to reduce the national debt, 2.6 trillion, and said today one in 10 public pounds has been spent on interest on the national debt. So I always welcome any government taking action to reduce the national debt rather than just increasing it for short-term interest. I think that's a sort of long-term planning that benefits a country.
Fair enough, put those comments on the record. I would, I'm not sure others probably wouldn't quite put it like that, or might put the emphasis differently, but entirely reasonable to put using the point. Just to clarify something I said incorrectly, it's not all 370 million, it is 240 resource million additional and 130 in capital, which is the breakdown of the additional monies. So we will be able to talk about that more at the next session, and if we get more during the
as soon as we get
anything live, we can come back and discuss it in the next couple of hours while we're at the meeting. Okay, next item of chairperson's business is the Northern Ireland Enterprise Support Service. Relates to the Enterprise Support Service, which is known as Go Succeed. So it's at page 6 of the meeting pack. The programme lead from the Northern Ireland Enterprise Support Service has written to raise concerns regarding the potential impact of delays and funding changes on the Enterprise Support Service. Members will recall at last week's meeting, similar concerns were discussed regarding the Local Growth Fund, including the prohibition or the constraint on using it for resource, which is a particular challenge for Go Succeed. And the committee agreed to firstly write to the Secretary of State about the fund, and secondly to seek an update from the Department of Finance and work to expedite the development of the fund. The committee also indicated that it would consider holding an oral evidence session on this in due course. So, members, we have also agreed to forward the NICFA and pivotal reports to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury and Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Those papers are at items 5.15 and 5.16. We'll note the correspondence for now from Go Succeed, but I think it's worth putting on the record. This is a scheme which is delivered between local councils, and it has been important in terms of providing entrepreneurship support, some of which is a replacement of the work previously done under the auspices of EU funding. It is very important and there's a real concern, as with other entities who are affected by the Local Growth Fund, about the way that is being managed. So please, they wrote to us and we will respond to them and possibly take more action whenever we get responses from our correspondence to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State. Members are content? Okay, next item is invitation from the Human Rights Commission to their launch of their human rights statement. That's at page 11. It's really just to note, unless any member wishes to go along, it is Monday week upstairs in the Long Gallery. written statement from TO relating to, which this is the written statement on the publication of the COVID-19 Module 2 report. That's at page 14 of the meeting pack for a press release from the First and Deputy First Ministers regarding the publication of findings of Module 2 of the COVID-19 inquiry. I would say, first of all, not in a chairing capacity, I think this will be an important reference point and background document whenever we come to look at some of the issues around civil service capacity, capability and reform in our inquiry, because it isn't simply a matter for, as it were, politicians. It is, and on that side, though that has been well rehearsed, including by myself and others, actually there are questions for the civil service too that I think are thrown up. I would make the argument that I think it makes a clear case for reform of how our institutions work and changing the way our politics work, but I also think in terms of the bureaucracy, there are lessons to be learned as well. That's to note, unless anybody else wishes to come in. Yeah, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just on that, you know, it's good to have the report there to note, but, you know, it would be my opinion that the criticism of the executive, and it doesn't really reflect the unique and challenging form of government that we have here in Northern Ireland, and it's just important that we take account of the full circumstances, and you know, at least when we're all looking at it, Chair, SDLP were on the executive during that period as well, so just to
fair enough. That's a fair point to put on the record. I can happily defend and stand over the record of my minister, who is of course no longer in politics. So she's no longer here in that sense. But there are definitely lessons for our broader politics, and I think that's one that we will discuss and look at both in this committee and elsewhere in Stormont in the weeks and months ahead. Okay, House of Commons Economic Indicators Report. This was included just because it's shared with the committee. It's the latest set of economic indicators, and obviously it has been somewhat superseded by the documents which have been published this week from the OBR. I mean, without going into all of the details, you'll have seen from the updated OBR forecast there is a downgrade to the growth UK growth forecast over the next number of years, particularly driven, I think I'm right in saying, by another downgrade to the productivity forecast. I think I've got that right. But in any case, it is a tricky picture, and I think it's something we want to look at, particularly as we examine the Fiscal Council bill and whether what the Fiscal Council is looking at is sufficient. I remain of the view that some form of economic analysis, economic forecast, or at least a composite picture of economic trends as opposed to fiscal decisions or fiscal output in Northern Ireland would be a really useful thing for the Fiscal Council to provide. I think that would, and I remain more convinced of that, but that's a personal and party view. Okay, next item of Chairperson's business relates members to the head of the civil service. We obviously a couple of weeks ago had Neil Gibson up in front of us regarding issues to do with the civil service, specifically the Education Minister's trip to Israel and the occupied territories and the Code of Ethics, but broader questions about how the Code of Ethics operate. We had intended to copy that to the head of the civil service. Unfortunately, an administrative error meant that it wasn't copied to the head of the civil service. So to put on record, our apologies as a committee for that, because it should have been copied. I understand that they had asked, so we extend our apologies in relation to that. I should append to that two other points. Our door remains open to the head of the civil service should she wish to come in to come and join us. Obviously, if she felt she had wanted to, she was more than welcome to join, and she remains more than welcome to join. I hope and assume we will have her in front of us whenever we come to do our hearing on our various hearings on civil service reform. But I remain open. Our door remains open in that sense. I would also say, at a personal note, I was disappointed to see, pardon me, a report on the findings of what appear to be the findings of a civil service fact-finding effort. I presume it was the one overseen by the head of the civil service, but I don't know, being placed on the executive website relatively obscurely on a day last week without members, certainly myself, who have been awaiting correspondence, and I know because it was read into the record, Mr. Philip Brett, former member of this committee, was awaiting similar correspondence. So I was pretty disappointed to see that published quietly on a corner of the executive website rather than shared proactively with members. So I just put that on the record. If anyone else wishes to come in. Okay. Agenda item 4 is draft minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November 2025. Members are at page 16 of the meeting pack. If members are content with those minutes and that they are a true reflection, I will sign them. Content. Matters arising is agenda item 5. We now have Dallo extracts starting at page 28 of the pack, members. So the first one is the Public Office Accountability Bill, and that's at page 31 of the meeting pack. The committee previously requested a definitive timeline for the executive's decision making on this LCM, and on this LCM, and the department indicated to the committee that it intended to seek the executive support at its scheduled meeting on the 19th of November. Sorry, the 20th of November, that's my fault, I misread that. At a scheduled meeting on the 20th of November for a legislative consent motion to be laid under Standing Order 42A. Sorry, to reread that sentence so it makes sense to someone who's listening. The department indicated to us that it intended to discuss the LCM at the executive meeting on the 20th of November, prior to a legislative consent memorandum being laid under Standing Order 42A. However, the Dallo has indicated to us that that did not happen, and we await further updates from officials. So members, if we are content, I think we need to get an urgent update from the department on what is happening with this LCM. We, again, do not want to be in the situation we were in with the Data Use and Access Bill, which was, as we discussed at the time, an absolute fiasco. If there's an issue with executive agreement or some concern, I think we need to know. If it's just process and the executive agenda was busy, that's fine, but we need to know ASAP. It's not good enough, basically, to not give us any detail. Members are content. We ask that and ask for an urgent update. The next Dallo readout response relates to the department, relates to the review of ALBs. That's on page 32 of the meeting pack. The committee previously asked if the review of arm's length bodies was a new exercise. The department has indicated that this is a new arm's length body exercise which began in September. However, separately, somewhat confusingly, but perhaps that's part of the point, there is an ALB pay landscape review exercise, an extensive data collection exercise and collation and analysis of pay-related information across public sector staff groups and arm's length bodies. This will also inform and provide important contextual information for the ALB review. The current ALB review exercise will seek additional information to align with the pay review landscape exercise. Confirmation was also provided that the review exercise will not include a detailed look at back office functions. However, information is being requested at the extent to which ALBs use shared services and other means by which ALB efficiency, structure and governance can be improved. Now, members, I am a bit confused, I have to say, so it's worth putting that slight confusion on the record. Why I say that is this. The ALB review, we are told the ALB review is not the same review which was promised in New Decade, New Approach. It is a review, but it's not the same review. It's a slightly confusing picture. The New Decade, New Approach document, which is nearly 6 years old now, amazingly, said, quote, that the the newly formed executive then would define terms of reference and initiate an efficiency and effectiveness review of all arm's length bodies with the aim of concluding the review and agreeing timescales for implementation within 6 months of the executive being restored. So we don't know what really became of that or whether that ever concluded, but we now know there's a new ALB exercise which began in September. Further to that, at finance questions yesterday, I believe the finance minister said that he thought ALB should be urgently reviewed. I'm slightly a bit confused.com here about what the status of a review, and if the Minister wants them urgently reviewed, does that indicate that the review that's currently happening either isn't urgent, or that he is frustrated that the previous review, which was overseen or not overseen by his colleague, didn't deliver? I think we need an urgent clarity from the Minister on what urgent review he has in mind. I think it's a bit of a problem sometimes whenever ministers talk about things in the ether that they personally have statutory responsibility for, and it just sort of floats into the ether, and then we don't hold them to account for it. So I would like clarity on what the Minister is talking about, whether this review is an urgent one, what the timescales are for it reporting back, and whether any action will be taken. Because we are kind of, I think at this point, in a bit of a weird Byzantine world of reviews going on. We've had the 10-year, now 2-year, we're told, strategic review cycle of rates. We've this at the minute has more reviews than the culture section of a newspaper, the department. So I think we need clarity on what exactly the timelines are for this ALB review. We are going to get an oral briefing in April 26th. Yes, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I think on this one, my understanding was from the NDNI required review, I think that was quite a high level one, and it was conducted. And whenever we've been asking questions through this committee and others over the past year, the Finance Minister has agreed that there needs to maybe be a bit more operational review, as you say, more so rather than the strategic, in order to take action. And ultimately there's so many arm's length bodies in different departments that, for example, you have multiple bodies within the Department of Health. Like it would be my opinion that in the first instance those ministers should be looking at their own arm's length bodies and gathering that sort of information, then feeding it back through and just reporting it centrally. But just from this information here today, I think it's very concerning but not surprising that we have all of these, I think there's well in excess of 100 bodies we're talking about here in terms of quangos, and there's no centralised information, that nobody knows what everybody's getting paid, how many there are, what the structures are, and they're undertaking this exercise now. I'm incredibly alarmed that nobody has this, and they're commencing this review. So if we are writing into it, I think it's more than just asking the Finance Minister, why haven't you done this? I think it would be worth actually saying, can we ask every minister what they've done with all their own arm's length bodies? Because just because we're not seeing it sitting here centrally doesn't mean that there's nothing being done. And I would be quite shocked that if within each department they're not looking at their own. And I think we nearly need to reach out that way, especially with those particular departments. And I just say health because I know off the top of my head how many separate bodies there are within it, but I don't know whether we want to reach out to the different committees ourselves, or we want to feed that back through the finance way. But I think that it would be good to get that information, and I don't, just because we're sitting at the central point of review within this committee, I don't think that it's all on the Department of Finance.
Can I make a
suggestion? In case of going direct to Minister.
So I think that's a good point, and I think maybe we are going the first instance to the Finance Minister and asking what's the crack here. You said this should be reviewed urgently. Well, you're in charge of it. What's happened? It's apparently already reviewed, and there was anyway. So what is actually happening? What's the timeline? And then sometimes it is helpful to get consistency from other departments and what their understanding is. So I am, if other members are content, I am content for us to go to other departments and say, as Finance Committee, we have lead responsibility for monitoring this. Can you tell us what you are doing, what your belief is? Worth just saying, Cletus just flagged to me the Communities Committee are themselves looking at this, but there's no harm in us writing to other departments and getting clarity from them, and obviously then we can copy the responses that we get to the individual statutory committees if members are content. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and just one further, just because this point is referenced about how they're reviewing the different pay review landscapes across the different bodies. If we're writing to the different ministers, it would be good to ask, have they got some sort of collation of what all the different pay structures are within the arm's length bodies under their own departmental responsibility?
Okay, Brian Kingston.
Just to comment, the briefing we've received say that the purpose of this review is to see how ways in which ALBs can use shared services to improve efficiency. Yet it also says it's not including back office functions such as finance, HR and IT. Surely that's exactly the sort of thing that could become a shared service to improve efficiency. I don't understand why.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose theoretically, one might be looking at it in relation to, policy delivery rather than strict back. But you're right. On the face of it, it's pretty contradictory. And I think particularly in a world where, we are told consistently about the constraints in financing and frontline services, I think the public will want to know that there aren't, as it were, quangos that are just continuing to exist because they exist and they're not
contained empires,
well, I don't know, and they're not. There are lots to do really important work. To be absolutely clear, some of that's regulatory, some of that is holding executive to account, some of that is. But I do think looking at it in a fresh way and being honest about it, particularly if you're saying to the public and if you're saying to, for example, community and voluntary organisations that, we're having to squeeze your core funding, you need to be clear that you are as optimised as possible in relation to ALBs that continue to exist. Do we know whether the whatever previous review did happen under, I have a memory in my head, but I can't remember now, whether there was an actual report back to the Assembly about the 2021? We could just find that out.
I was going to say there wasn't, but we'll check on that.
Yeah.
There was a previous one done when the departments were about to reduce from 12 to 9. I don't recall anything closing down at that one either.
Right.
Okay. We'll check back for both of those.
Okay. Next agenda item is 5.4, which is the minutes of proceedings and the annotated marshalled list for further consideration stage of the Deaths, Births and State Baby Loss Bill. We've already done the further consideration stage and it's completed. We will have final stage, I'm pleased to say, next Tuesday, the 2nd of December. We will talk about a press release from the committee later on, and obviously we're pleased that it is getting to final stage. 5.5 is a letter from Lord Carlisle, who's the chair of the House of Lords NI Scrutiny Committee, to the Secretary of State in the carbon border adjustment mechanism. That's at page 35. We've been copied into that correspondence as a courtesy and can be expected to be copied into the response, just to note. 5.6, digital infrastructure and cybersecurity in the community and voluntary sector. This issue was discussed last week and we agreed to have an informal briefing at some point in the future with the Communities Committee. This is to note only. Now we're going on to the tabled pack. 5.7 is the LPS Trust Statement, Rate Levy Accruals Accounts. Members, this is page 6 of the tabled pack. At the meeting on the 5th of November, the committee asked LPS for a response to the CNAG, that's the Controller and Auditor General's concerns outlined in her report within the LPS Trust Statement. LPS addresses the two areas of concern. Firstly, unpaid rates. Second, where LPS highlighted improvements have been made, reflected in a 6% increase in gross rate assessments for rates to be collected, while unpaid rates only increased by a marginal 0.05%, although that is still an increase. Secondly, in relation to vacancy discharge, LPS highlight that to strengthen assurance, it has started physical vacancy inspections during 25-26 and is working with NISRA to compare vacant property records against census and business register data. So that is to note, but in case anybody wants to come in? No? Okay. Dallow extract now, or a series of Dallow extracts from the meeting on the 12th of November. First of which is shared property management, rates of shared property management, and is at page 9, of the tabled pack. So there you will see the department has confirmed that new regulations in relation to shared property management will be formed following consultation and policy development. Policy development has taken place, although it is too early to indicate broad provisions. It is likely that they will encompass codes of conduct for shared property managers and redress schemes relating to service charges. Now, one question to ask is whether we have any sense of timeline, or if this is just being done as a kind of preparation for a future minister in a new mandate. I think it's the latter rather than the former. It would be helpful to check on that, and I think it is, given, to put it delicately, some of the political instability that exists in this place. People who are, really, some of this stuff should be relatively routine in the sense we're far behind other jurisdictions, neighbours. It's kind of disappointing that all we're doing is preparing potential future legislation for future mandate, but it appears almost impossible that we'll get this done in this mandate. And I know I have several constituents, I should say, who are very frustrated in this subject.
A declaration of interest?
Yes, I suppose it is a declaration of interest, yes. In the sense that I have had correspondence and contact with constituents who are very keen to see legislation to improve regulation of shared property management in Northern Ireland. Jerry Carroll, yeah. Jerry?
Yeah, Chair, I think we discussed this. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I think we discussed this last year, but I don't believe this includes people who bought their homes from the housing executive. I don't think so. Because I remember, I think Paul Frew raised the point at the time, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't include those people. But could we just clarify that? And also, I've been working with quite a lot of constituents who are who bought their homes from the housing executive, and they're being, hit with a large maintenance fee, and we're sort of challenging it. So just to put that on the record as well.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I suppose I'm not sure, Jerry. I mean, given there's no legislation is drafted, so there's no. I presume housing executive properties would be probably exempted.
Clarification: it's former housing executive properties. So
no, that. But if you're saying, like, obviously, if there's former housing executive properties, they may still be, for example, in an apartment block, still overall managed by the housing executive. So they are the manager, even if there's an individual flat or whatever owned by.
So we just, if we could just clarify why that's being looked at, I would appreciate that. Thanks.
Clarify that point. Yeah, that's fine. But I suppose it reinforces the point that it's only being looked at, and there's no sense that it's going to happen before the end of this mandate anyway, whether or not it includes the housing executive. But I think it's an important question to ask. Okay, next point is, or the next response relates to baby loss certificate draft regulations. That's at page 10 of the table pack. The department has indicated that that they can only bring draft regulations to the Assembly once royal assent is granted. This could take place as early as the new year, but the department will keep the committee informed, i.e. royal assent could happen early in the new year, I think, rather than the regulations. Albeit, I think it's probably worth saying and putting on the record, if it's literally the minute royal assent is granted, then there's absolutely nothing stopping them having the regulations ready to go for the moment they get confirmation that royal assent has been granted. The next agenda item is 5.11 and is on the same thing. Death, stillbirths and baby loss bill. There's a draft press release at page 11 of the table pack, members. So if you have any comments on the draft, you don't have to give them now, but feel free to share them with the team before the 3rd of December, Tuesday, 2nd of December. The only one I have is, I think, this is the ex-communications person. I think Diane and I should have 2 separate quotes. I think it's slightly strange. Not that we aren't speaking with one voice on this bill, but it's a bit of a surreal thing to have
it is unusual.
2 people given one quote. I think you can have 2 different quotes. I don't think that's the end of the world.
Yeah.
If we can take that offline, I think it's a bit surreal. It's just a bit surreal, I think. But anyway, but it's a very good press release other than that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Share your other comments. Yes, Brian.
I'm just looking through the baby law. I mean, it talks about. Can someone clarify? It talks about this being a historic day, for families, and the Northern Assembly has made history. Are we the first legislation to introduce
First legislation to bring in baby loss certificates? Yeah,
but
others have schemes, but they aren't legislated for.
Yeah, it's just to explain that. I don't think that's not actually stated in the press release. Why the Assembly has made the history.
I think that could probably be in notes to editors, or just explaining that this is, this is the only statutory one, certainly in these islands.
I mean, that's the first word in the headline, historic day in the history. So it doesn't actually explain, that why it is history.
Okay. So 5.12 is sickness in the civil service, and it is a correction in relation to statistics of comparison with local councils. That's at page 13 of the table pack. The department has written to the committee to informative corrections to the local council comparator figures presented in ISRA sickness in the civil service 22-23 and 23-24 reports. The department highlight that incomplete returns led to lower reported sickness rates than those published in the local government auditor's report, where the figures for local government sickness absence are published. The revised figures indicate that civil service sickness has been lower than in councils since 2015-16. Members will appreciate that sickness absence is a theme in the committee's forthcoming inquiry. So that is interesting, and I think worth noting. Probably worth also saying that still both local councils and the civil service here are still significant outliers when compared with other comparable workforces on these islands. But I think it's important that we've got that clarification. 5.13 again is the review of arm's length bodies. That's at page 15 of the table pack. The Communities Committee has written to the Department of Finance regarding its review of ALBs and asks that it is seeking the views of ALBs of the Department of it is seeking the review. Excuse me. It is seeking the views of communities ALBs as part of evidence gathering for its review. This committee has been copied into the correspondence as a courtesy, and we can expect to see a response in due course, and that will obviously be pertinent to the information gathering we are doing that we discussed earlier. 5.14 is from the Economy Committee, and it's a call for evidence on the RHI closure of the non-domestic scheme bill. That's page 17 of the tabled pack. The Economy Committee has launched its call for evidence on the RHI closure of non-domestic scheme bill and asked this committee for its views on the objectives, proposals and potential consequences of the bill by the 1st December, which is pretty tight, to be honest, because it's next Monday. And it's basically not going to happen. I think it's not a reasonable timeline. Or we could say to our former colleague, Chair of the Economy Committee, Mr. Brett, that not quite what we need in terms of time. We will try and turn it around quickly, but what we will get from the Department of Finance, if members are agreed, is their view on the bill's objectives and specifically, financial consequences, I think, is ours and the department's purview. And obviously, given the historic nature of worries over RHI that need not be rehearsed in this room of all places, we will get the view of the department. Okay, 5.15 and 5.16 is NICVA pivotal reports on the community and voluntary sector. They're page 31 and 42 of the tabled packs. We discussed them last week, and so they're to note. 5.17 is correspondence from an individual. We have discussed that this individual, and that's a polite way of describing them, is having an electronic folder used to store their correspondence. That's to note. The next agenda item is the SL1 on government resources and accounts estimates, or GRANI if you prefer, so sometimes the acronym, a designation of bodies, Amendment Order 2025. This is an annual thing where the department makes a statutory rule to update the list of public bodies that are included for designation in departmental estimates and accounts as in each financial year. The rule is subject to negative resolution and will be come into operation on the 1st of January 26. Full details of the SL1 can be found at the Clerk's cover note on page 42 of the meeting pack. Members, there have been 3 new bodies added and 11 bodies renamed, the detail of which can be found at page 47 of the meeting pack. Members, if you're content with the statutory rule to designate these bodies, you can either indicate that now or request any further information. People are content with that in broad terms? Good. Agenda item 7 is the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council Bill. So, members, we just to update members, we invited the Nevin Institute and Pivotal to join to brief us on the NI Fiscal Council Bill. Pivotal have confirmed that they will join us. The Nevin Institute, along with the Ulster University, the Nevin Institute is not able to make it, but they will provide written comments for us, if members are content. I had an additional thought, but I don't know if it's mad, so I won't say it out loud. I say too many mad thoughts out loud. Item 8 is the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, Committee deliberations. Members, page 50 of the meeting pack, there is obviously, we discussed last week, some legal advice on admissibility of amendments, and we're going to ask Mr. Clerk to update members.
Members, there's really nothing huge to say about that, but it was basically around the issues that were raised before around what you could put into this bill. We were given advice around the admissibility of amendments. They don't have to relate to anything that's already in the bill, and they are admissible technically when they fill those criteria that members now have on a fantastic laminated sheet that will be brought out at every meeting yes. from here till the end of these particular bills, but also essentially if an amendment can fulfil those criteria and is within the scope of the title of the bill, the long title of the bill, it's theoretically admissible. However, standing orders indicates that the Speaker has last say. So whatever the Speaker decides in his determination of amendments, that is that. But in terms of admissibility, anything that the committee is looking at or anything the committee might suggest, we'll run it through the admissibility matrix. Yeah. But that's just to give members a kind of visualisation of what that looks like. But this does remain a very broad bill, as members have discussed previously.
The long title is pretty expansive. And I'm just delighted to see the lamination of this for the benefit of MLAs, which please do not read that as an indication of what our clerk team think of our bibs and high chair for next week.
It's just for longevity's sake, because these are actually usable from now until the end of time, because they're applicable to every bill.
Okay. Excellent, thank you very much. So, members, further to that, we agreed to
at the end of the session.
We agreed to correspond with other statutory committees regarding the scope of the bill. So we've done that. The committee also wrote to the Department of Finance asking about future amendments, i.e. whether they had any other intentions in that regard. We haven't received a response yet. Agenda item 9 is the Cybersecurity and Resilience. This is our oral briefing on that bill, the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill. Now, this is a bill.
Hopefully they are.
This is an LCM rather than an Stormont bill, I should say. This is a bill for which will be asked to give our legislative consent.
Yes.
Page 70 of the table pack includes a briefing paper on DSIT, Department of Science, Innovation and Technologies, Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill. It wasn't available in time for the main meeting pack, so it's in the table pack. The briefing paper from the department. Page 68 of the table pack also is a memo from the clerk. We also have in our main pack correspondence from the Department of Finance, which was from a while ago, which alerted us to the existence of this bill, a copy of the bill itself at page 54 of the meeting pack, and explanatory notes at page 154. So members, yes, sorry, if members are agreed, yes, of course, as always. The big bit in red I always forget to read, which is, assuming members are agreed that Hansard will provide a transcript of this agenda item, and they've already arrived, helpfully. Members, just to be clear, what this does is it alters the executive functions of the Department of Finance in its role as a designated competent authority under the Network and Information Systems Regulations 2018. It delegates powers to the Secretary of State, for example, to make secondary legislation, but we can find out more about this in the evidence session about what it exactly does, and introduces various measures which will have an impact on the devolved administrations. So this is very important that we understand what this bill does in broad terms, and what we are specifically being asked for legislative consent for. So welcome Paul Duffy, again, who's Deputy Secretary of Digital Security and Finance Shared Services, and Hugh Tohill, who is Director, I did say Deputy Secretary rather than Deputy Director. Hugh Tohill is Director of Digital Security and Engagement. Welcome both. Thanks for coming. We'd like an opening statement, please, Paul. Obviously, do give us the core bits, but obviously we'll tease out as much as possible in questions as well. And members, indicate if you want to ask a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair, Deputy Chair and committee members for the opportunity to brief the committee on UK's Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill, which was introduced to the House of Commons on the 12th of November. This legislation seeks to strengthen defences against cyber threats to essential services across the UK, including here in Northern Ireland. With cyber attacks on the rise, and the UK is the most targeted country in Europe for cyber attacks, the bill aims to ensure that services the public relies on every day are better protected. It updates and expands on the Network and Information Systems Regulations 2018 to drive a step change in cyber resilience for critical infrastructure such as energy, drinking water, transport, healthcare and digital infrastructure. Cyber threats have evolved rapidly since the original NIS framework was introduced in 2018. Hostile states, criminal groups are launching more frequent and sophisticated attacks on critical systems, targeting not only the primary operators, but also their suppliers and digital service providers. In the last 18 months, we've seen hospitals, local councils, government networks and democratic institutions hit by cyber incidents. An independent study estimates that significant cyber attacks cost the UK economy around £14.7 billion per year, underscoring the scale of the challenge, and Northern Ireland is by no means immune to these threats. This bill is in response to today's evolving threat environment. The bill's primary objective is to modernise and strengthen the UK's cybersecurity regime for essential services and digital infrastructure. It does this by reforming the NIS Regulations 2018 in 3 ways: expanding the scope of what's protected, empowering regulators with new tools and resources, and enabling swifter government action in response to emerging threats. Importantly, while it deals with technical subjects, this is not a highly technical IT bill. It is fundamentally about governance, resilience and accountability in cybersecurity. It ensures the right duties, oversight mechanisms and powers are in place to improve cyber resilience across critical sectors. The bill will bring more essential services and their supply chains into the regulatory framework. When NIS was first introduced, it covered operators in 5 critical sectors: energy, transport, health, drinking water and digital infrastructure, and certain digital services like cloud providers, online marketplaces and search engines. This bill expands this scope and adds new categories that reflect today's risk areas, such as data centres, managed service providers, large load controllers in energy and designated critical suppliers. Perhaps most importantly, regulators will gain power to designate certain key suppliers of essential services as being critical and bring them under regulation. The bill seeks to bolster the capabilities of the 12 regulators known as competent authorities who oversee the NIS implementation across the different sectors. This includes the Department of Finance, which is designated as the NIS competent authority for our devolved sectors. This includes energy, health, drinking water and transport. Currently, organisations only have to report cyber incidents if they significantly disrupt services. This misses early warning signs, for instance, if hackers infiltrate a system but haven't yet caused an outage. The bill will mandate that a broader range of material cyber incidents and breaches are reported within tight timelines, initial notification within 24 hours, fuller report within 72 hours. This includes incidents like a ransomware infection, even if the services haven't yet been knocked offline. The goal is to give regulators and government a much better real-time picture of threats so they can respond faster. The bill introduces a statement of strategic priorities mechanism allowing the decent Secretary of State to set clear objectives for how regulators should implement cyber regulations to drive more consistency across sectors. One practical issue has been that regulators have ability to fund their expanded activities. The bill will empower regulators to cover the full cost of the NIS regulatory work from the companies they oversee. Similar to other regimes, operators of essential services may be charged fees to cover compliance audits, guidance and enforcement efforts. This ensures regulators, especially where resources are tight, can hire the necessary experts and run the robust programmes without being constrained by internal budgets. Importantly, regulators must be transparent and accountable for how they use these funds with published charging schemes. The bill makes it easier for regulators to share information with others and with bodies like law enforcement or intelligence agencies in the context of cyber threats. This addresses legal uncertainties that currently might slow down cross-agency cooperation. The existing NIS enforcement regime, including penalties for non-compliance, will be updated. The bill raises the ceiling on fines to align with regimes like GDPR, although the exact levels are still subject to final agreement. These changes will give the Department of Finance, as the Northern Ireland regulator, the tools and resources needed to ensure our local essential service providers are truly meeting their obligations. Rather than add bureaucracy, this is about making regulation more effective, getting better information on risks, having the funding to engage more with operators, and being able to act decisively if standards are not met. Finally, the bill recognises that cyber is a fast-moving domain. It gives the decent Secretary of State new powers to adapt or intervene when needed for national security. Currently, to expand NIS to new sectors or to significantly change security rules, primary legislation is needed, which can take some time to put in place. The bill will enable government to add new sectors or adjust security requirements via secondary legislation. This future-proofing means if a new critical technology or sector emerges, so for example something like AI as a service or quantum cloud in the future, posing systemic risk, we won't have to wait years for another act. DESA can enact regulations to bring into scope quickly, subject to parliamentary oversight. Drawing on precedents in other national security laws, The bill gives Decent Secretary of State the power to issue binding directions to regulators, but not to a devolved government acting as a regulator, as here in Northern Ireland, and directly to companies in the event of an urgent, extreme cyber attack. This would be used only in exceptional cases, for example, if there was intelligence of an imminent cyber campaign targeting critical infrastructure. The Secretary of State could direct companies to take specific preventive actions immediately. In summary, the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill delivers a comprehensive upgrade to the current cybersecurity laws. It expands coverage to more of the systems that matter, gives regulators more capacity, equips government to handle serious threats in real time. Turning to Northern Ireland's interests, although this is a UK-wide bill, its implications for Northern Ireland and our devolved responsibilities have been carefully considered. Cybersecurity of essential services straddles reserved and devolved competencies. The UK's view, as set out in the devolution analysis, is that the bill's provisions largely relate to matters that are accepted or reserved, namely national security and telecommunications. However, in practice, the bill will operate through the existing NIS framework, which involves devolved sectors and authorities. As I said, here in Northern Ireland, the Department of Finance is the competent authority under the NIS regulations for our devolved sectors. We develop policy for NIS in Northern Ireland, oversee and enforce the regulations for local operators of essential services, and coordinate with the UK Government on cyber legislation and policy. So naturally, this bill directly engages devolved functions, even though it's being passed at Westminster. The Department of Finance has reviewed the bill's provisions to determine which engaged devolved matters. Our legal advisors in the Departmental Solicitor's Office have been engaging with decent legal advisors as we seek to finalise our consideration of the devolution analysis. This includes considering the Windsor framework implications for Northern Ireland, checking if any aspect of the bill might conflict with our unique post-EU arrangements. Crucially, the bill aligns with the EU's NIS 2 directive reforms, which were adopted in December 2022, and has similar key provisions such as expanded scope, risk management reporting and stricter enforcement. Given Northern Ireland's geographical and economic proximity to the EU, and indeed the cross-border provision of some of our services, this alignment means our operators will be held to a comparable standard of cyber resilience as their counterparts across Europe, closing any regulatory gap that adversaries might wish to exploit. The overarching conclusion of Decent's devolution analysis is that they believe none of the bill's provisions are in the devolved space, leaning on broad national security grounds. However, Decent intends to seek legislative consent from the Northern Ireland Assembly for certain provisions, and have identified a total of 15 clauses in one schedule which will alter the executive functions of the Department of Finance. On the timing of the bill, the UK Parliament has commenced its consideration with the bill's introduction on the 12th of November. A second reading of the bill is yet to be scheduled, and is anticipated that the third reading of the bill will take place in the House of Commons next summer, before being introduced to the House of Lords. To allow time for the final considerations of the devolution and Windsor framework analysis, the Finance Minister will be laying a memorandum before the Assembly, explaining why a legislative consent motion is not being sought at this time. We are hopeful that this final consideration of the devolution analysis and the Windsor framework analysis will be completed in the coming weeks, at which stage the Minister will take a view on commencing the legislative consent process. At that stage, I'm more than happy to come back to the committee to provide any further update on the analysis that has been completed. In conclusion, the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill represents a vital step forward for protecting essential services in Northern Ireland from the growing cyber threat. It brings the legal framework up to date, incorporating lessons from incidents in recent years, and creates stronger defences and response powers. So thank you for your attention. Hugh and I are happy to take any comments or questions.
Thanks for that, Paul. So just all members, obviously, as always, indicate if you wish to ask a question. So just to confirm, has the Finance Minister taken a view on whether he will recommend legislative consent be granted?
At this stage, Chair, the Finance Minister hasn't been asked to take a view on it, because what we want to ensure is the devolution analysis and the Windsor framework has been fully considered before we put that advice to him.
He hasn't been asked by officials, or he hasn't been asked by the UK government?
He's been asked by the UK government, but not by officials.
But I suppose he can give a view if he wants. He doesn't have to. But you are saying to him basically, we're going to give him more So what you are waiting on is more detailed legal opinion on whether you agree with the UK government's view of which provisions specifically touch on devolved competence. Their view is basically very little of it, apart from 15 clauses in one schedule?
15 clauses across a number of areas.
Which areas do they? And you haven't agreed. You're not the executive or the official level. You haven't formally legally agreed that yet.
Yes, there are one or two areas we've just sought some further clarification on. So we want to be absolutely clear on the powers that are being granted through this bill to the Secretary of State. So that is the one area where we're still just seeking some final clarification. We're expecting a response back from DCIT by the end of this week on that matter. And the other matter we just want to make sure that is properly considered is the Windsor Framework Analysis. Whilst there doesn't appear to be any significant issues, we just want to make sure due process was properly followed.
On the previous incidents, just first of all on the first part on the Secretary of State powers, do the clauses where you are seeking more information, are they all clauses which relate to the Secretary of State having powers to do things, i.e. direct public bodies or businesses to do one thing or another, to disclose information of a cyber attack or whatever it is? Do they all relate to powers being taken by the Secretary of State?
Yes, so that's the area we just want to make sure we're absolutely clear on what the bill means in terms of that, the extent of those powers and who do they apply for. We have certainly clarification around that the Secretary of State cannot direct a regulator within a devolved government, and that was one of the things that was outstanding.
Under this bill, it doesn't allow that to happen?
No. But the Secretary of State does have the power to direct operators of essential services, so I managed service providers and companies, if there are concerns around a significant cyber risk.
So just to kind of work that through, at the minute, a UK Secretary of State or this Secretary of State, DCIT Secretary of State, I presume, that UK Secretary of State does not have the power to, for example, if there is this might be a bad example, and tell me if it's completely inappropriate, but that wasn't a hack, that was a human error, but the data breach incident that affected the PSNI a couple of years ago, say for the sake of argument, that was a result of rather than human error, say that was the result of a hack. And this is, by the way, in case I was watching, a totally hypothetical example I'm just trying to use. In that scenario, the Secretary of State does not have the power to order whoever the service provider is or the PSNI to do anything at the minute. Under this legislation, they would.
It depends on the organisation.
So, for example, say it was Fujitsu, BT, whoever, they're companies.
And they will be operators of essential service or sort of large-scale service providers. So it's likely to be an organisation that's operating UK-wide, like a Fujitsu or a BT, or it'll be one of the very large operators.
But it wouldn't necessarily be. I mean, it could be. It could theoretically be possible for it to be in Northern Ireland specific if they decide, if for whatever reason they decide that this cyber incident, this hypothetical cyber incident, only affects Northern Ireland, but they've decided that the bill gives the Secretary of State the power to say whether they want to issue an order of one kind or another to this specific provider to
and
do
if
something.
It meets certain thresholds, for example, if it's a national security issue rather than a localised issue.
Okay. The national, is that power all in the hands of the Secretary of State to effectively decide what they deem to be, obviously they will get advice presumably, but they will have the power to, and when that happens, do they have to make, do they have to lay a statutory instrument or something? Or
so my understanding is, yes, they do have to go through a parliamentary process.
Okay. That is effectively a new development, though, so it's basically giving a UK Secretary of State the power to to intervene, to request that either a service provider, public or private, but you're finding that out?
Yes, and I think that what's crucial here is that where there is a wide systemic risk of an incident, that it's intervening in a way that is curtailing that from expanding into other sectors or other areas. So it's to allow, I think it's in recognition of how quick a cyber incident can evolve into something much larger. So, and if you were to wait on having to put in place legislation before you respond to an incident, they'll be long gone before you're able to
Who's responsible
intervene.
for this at the minute? These kinds of, is it a devolved minister who has the power to do these things, or
it depends on the incident, on the organisation, on the threshold. So we, as in the Department of Finance, do currently have the role in regulating operations of essential services in Northern Ireland. So if you take, for example, a health trust, so if there's an incident, a cyber incident within a health trust, at the moment that trust would have to notify the competent authority, being the Department of Finance, that there was an incident. They would go through their own continuity processes in terms of managing that incident, but we would expect to see an incident report, an understanding of how that incident arose, what mitigations they put in place, how they responded to it, what they've learned from it. So there would be almost like a follow-up audit with recommendations then to that particular trust on future, how to prevent future incidents.
The kinds of powers you have are not anywhere near what the UK Secretary of State is seeking to take in this bill, presumably? Or
well, no, because the powers that we have at the moment are around our local services and providers, whereas the powers the Secretary of State would have would be UK-wide powers.
So I accept that one is UK-wide and the other, yours is currently local, but apart from the geographical remit, are they of similar legal import? Do you have the similar power to command them to release information to you, for example?
Yes, so we can at the moment request information from them, so we put information notices out, and we also have the power to...
They are legally obliged to follow it, and they're not just...
Yes.
You have the right to ask, they must comply.
Yeah, and the reporting has to be within the time frame as well, so they legally have to do that as well. I suppose to think about, if there was an incident, say, in a local trust in Northern Ireland, and it was potentially, I'm trying to think hypothetically of an example, if it was caused by a supplier, which was a UK-wide supplier to other health providers, then the Secretary of State would obviously wish to take an interest in that regard, because that could have a UK-wide health impact.
This doesn't mean that the health trust in this hypothetical scenario now has to make their disclosure to the Secretary of State. It means that the Secretary of State, if he or she is advised by their officials that this is more systemic and or UK-wide,
if it became a national issue, that's when the Secretary of State would have the powers then to intervene.
You mentioned the Windsor Framework. What specific issues are you alive to that are at play there?
I wouldn't call out any specific issues at this stage, but I suppose my concern just has been the quality of the analysis that's been provided. So I think
it's not good enough.
I don't think it meets the standard.
From whom?
From DCIT.
DCIT, okay.
So we have challenged the quality of it. We don't expect it to flag any particular issues, but we just want to make sure it's done through the right process and proper due diligence has been done.
Is it policy specific, or is it just that it just seems a bit flimsy?
I think it's the latter.
Okay, that's fair enough. It just seems like they haven't, basically it's been a bit desktop and not very...
Yeah, there is an obligation of them to follow certain guidance, and whilst this bill may not have huge implications for the Windsor Framework implications, we still wanted to follow the proper process.
One, obviously, issue, something I've talked about in another capacity, is one of the potentially unseen aspects of Brexit is that it's not, or it's only partially covered in certain contexts, largely around the movement of goods, is that data moves across the island of Ireland all the time. Organisations move data, often individuals move data. That's a bank. Churches, the GAA, whatever organisations that exist, trade unions that exist on an all-line basis. But we are kind of lucky at the minute in that the UK government has maintained GDPR adequacy. Is there anything here that could make that more challenging, that could create a situation where data is... I can't see one at the minute, but can you tell me if are there any...
Certainly not that I'm aware of, Chair. If anything, this bill aligns more with the NIS2 regulations within Europe, which came in 2022.
There's more surety that it, if anything.
So it brings a more comparable regulatory framework to organisations working across border.
Okay, that's really helpful. That is currently it for me, but I'm going to bring in colleagues, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming here today. At the outset, Paul, you had said that Northern Ireland is the most targeted part of the UK for cyber attacks.
Oh, sorry, the UK is the most targeted in Europe.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask you a wee bit more about the detail of that. But why do you think that is?
Why the UK is the most targeted?
Yeah.
There'll be a whole host of reasons. It'll be because some of it will be driven through politics as well. So you will see. We will have witnessed during conflicts over the Ukraine crisis that there will be an increase on certain countries in terms of where they support politically certain other countries. There will be more targeted threats and attacks. Hugh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more the geopolitical position in terms of the stance taken quite often by the UK government, which makes the UK an attractive proposition for nation states or adversaries at that level, and that's why, and also criminal gangs who operate from some of these adversary nations are targeting actively, not just for financial gain, but also for disruption and potentially impacting election processes and really the delivery of government across the UK.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. I was going to ask, I think you've kind of covered it, the reasoning around using the Westminster Bill rather than an act of the Assembly, but just for clarity, so you were saying that primary legislation will take a bit of time, but this will help you make sure that we're aligned and doing the right thing in the meantime. So is there an intention to still bring primary legislation on this?
No, largely because it's really a national security matter in terms of when you think about cyber, it doesn't sort of respect boundaries or geographical boundaries. So the UK is much stronger defending as a whole rather than as individual components. So the elements of this bill will strengthen our regulatory framework here and align with what's happening in the UK, and also it now aligns with the NIS directives for the rest of Europe. So I don't think there will be anything in terms of a huge advantage of having local legislation on such a wide-ranging issue.
And have you got any indications of the timescale for this?
The bill itself. So my understanding is the bill it has been introduced on the 12th of November. Second reading is hoped to be scheduled before Christmas, but we haven't got a date yet, with third reading towards the end of March, April, with it then being introduced into the House of Lords. Royal Assent is aimed for early 2027, so it's a year and a bit away.
Yeah, but it's all very current and very live, and important that we stay on top of it. It's such an important issue in the meantime. But thank you. That's all from me, Chair.
Okay, Harvey.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. I was just looking at it in practical terms. A cyber attack, it's not always something of financial interest to anybody. It's more of a stealing of data. And is that data worth anything? Can that be shared, sold, or passed on? Just thinking of the speed. When things are monitored, do you know of the likes of that? Can it be reported and addressed if an attack does take place quickly?
Yeah, Mr. Harvey, yes. We have really well established and effective working relationships with the National Authority around the National Cybersecurity Centre, as well as law enforcement here and other areas across Northern Ireland where we can stand up our cyber incident response processes very, 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 very quickly. And we feel that we have tested these plans. We have they've been tested to be effective, and we are confident that in the event of a major cyber incident locally, that we would have all the necessary people together very, very quickly to address that, as well as technical expertise from the private sector, where we have contractual arrangements ready in place for that.
I suppose the one thing I would just add is that we certainly wouldn't want to appear complacent in this area. You can do lots to prepare, and I think it's important that us as officials can give assurance around those preparations, but also this is a very fast-moving and growing sophistication in terms of cyber attacks, so we always have to be vigilant on it.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Enough. All right, Brian Kingston.
Okay, thank you for your attendance, Paul and Hugh. Certainly, I remember when I was on Belfast City Council when cybersecurity issues were coming up, it seemed quite a remote thing, but I think we're all aware now much more. I mean, this is the front line of defence of the UK in the modern world. You've said the UK is the most targeted country in Europe, primarily because of the stand it's taken against aggressors on the international stage and rogue state, and it's a consequence of that. I'm aware in all of this that speed of response is critical, that there can't be unnecessary delay when there's a cyber attack. So I'm interested in more in the national security level, about the powers that I think you said that the Department for Finance is designated competent authority, or the Finance Minister specifically, but also the Secretary of State has. Are you saying the Secretary of State will have certain increased powers, or will have how would you describe in lay terms the powers each will have, and when speed of response is critical to ensure that there's not unnecessary delay?
Yeah, so the powers that fall to the Finance Minister and Department of Finance as the competent authority are really to regulate those devolved sectors, which is energy, drinking water, transport and healthcare. So we will continue to exercise those. The powers that are proposed for the Secretary of State will allow the Secretary of State to, I suppose, have additional powers to intervene with particular companies, and will direct them to take particular action or to share information. So if I'm not going to say the trust, because someone will think I've got, I'm targeting healthcare here, but if there was an incident within TransLink, for example, we would be involved in that process and understanding what has happened and what the response is to it. Depending on how wide scale that response would be, there may be a need then for us to share the information we're gathering from the likes of TransLink with the Secretary of State or the National Cybersecurity Centre to consider whether there are national issues to be considered.
Yeah.
You may want to expand on
If
that.
I could just expand on that, operators of essential services are being regulated against the cyber assessment framework, which has been developed by the National Cybersecurity Centre, and Objective D, and that is minimising the impact of cyber incidents, with the key principle being response and recovery planning. So that response is deemed critical for operators of essential services to ensure they're effectively prepared for a major incident. So that is a critical element of what they're actually getting regulated against.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is that when there is a coordinated cyber attack, you can't waste time going through a list of people to get their approval to do something. That a response needs to be as immediate as possible and authorised from on high if necessary.
Yeah, I think if there is an incident, you will find that the organisation impacted will have its response plans and will respond to that particular incident. I suppose from a regular perspective, we'd like to understand, are there wider implications of that? And that's where I suppose being able to intervene quicker. And those earlier alerts within the 24 hours are really important because they give you an indication if there's an issue or is a systemic issue that we need to be concerned about.
Yeah. One other question, Chair. Harry and I were previously on the Executive Office Committee. They have a role over civil contingencies. Just wondering, how does this relate to that responsibility within TEO?
So if there is an isolated incident within a particular operator of essential service, particularly a public body, that will be managed by that organisation. But if that became something that was, I suppose, triggered civil contingencies in terms of being a wider impact on the Northern Ireland public, then civil contingencies would in a sense step in over above the local arrangement. So, for example, if there was an incident with a Northern Ireland department had a cyber attack, depending on how widespread the impact of that was, that the department would trigger its response plan. But if it was widespread, that may then trigger civil contingencies, and the Executive Office would then be involved.
Right. So there might be some overlap of responsibility between TEO and Department for Finance, or
there would, in terms of if there was a cyber incident. And no overlap with any. So at the moment, if for example, the Department for Infrastructure had a cyber incident solely within their department, If that became more widespread, then Executive Office would get involved through civil contingencies. Likewise, if it happened in any other department. So it's not just specific to DOF. It's departments have cyber responsibilities themselves. But where that becomes a wider Northern Ireland impact, then civil contingencies would have to be triggered.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Deirdre Harry.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, and thank yous for the presentation. And I think it's right to take time to look at the Windsor framework implications, because I know through the Justice Committee and the Crime and Policing Bill going through Westminster at the moment, the NI Select Committee raised concerns around compatibility in terms of the Windsor framework. In fact, there wasn't the proper scrutiny done in terms of human rights. So I'm glad that that extra work is being done, and I suppose I would like to know what the Human Rights Commission's view on this is, particularly around those national security provisions. So, of course, every country has national security considerations. My concern would be the checks and balances in terms of how that's used and making sure that it's not abused by a Secretary of State as well, and particularly in the devolved arena. And again, I would just to see if there has been views from the Human Rights Commission pertaining to these matters, and particularly around the Windsor framework, because I know within the Commission themselves, they set up a separate section to look at Windsor framework. And some of their concerns was that government departments, particularly in London, haven't really been having the same focus on those issues. So I'd be keen just to get assurances around that. And that, you know, there is that engagement where it's within devolved arena, and that those powers, that there's checks and balances even with the Secretary of State, particularly around national security as well.
And Chair, through the Chair, I suppose that is the crux of why we haven't at the moment accepted the Windsor Framework analysis that has been provided by DSIT. We have some concerns just around the rigour of how that's being completed, and that is, we're working through DSIT with legal advisors at the moment. I hope to conclude it within the next few weeks, but certainly that will be seeking assurances around issues such as human rights and ensuring that that proper analysis has been undertaken.
That it? Yep. Happy enough. Obviously, the NI Affairs Committee obviously just highlights the importance of taking seats in that committee and doing the scrutiny. Okay. Members, no further members have indicated they wish to ask questions. So I think at this point we'll release Paul and Hugh and ask that we're kept abreast of further developments in relation to the bill, including when the Minister and the Executive have discussed their approach to the LCM. I think there is lots more for us to look at here, but obviously really those are useful presentations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Members, we now are ahead of time. We're going to talk about. I don't think at this point we have any follow-up actions. I don't think we are going to be kept in bed. It's relatively early stage briefing, which is useful, and an improvement, I suppose, on the data use and access bill, which is helpful, and they're able to flag up early concerns around the Windsor framework analysis. Agenda item 10, as I say, is the Outturn and Forecast Outturn. At page 77 of the tabled pack, there's a briefing paper from the Department of Finance on the 25-26 public expenditure Outturn and Forecast Outturn October position. This wasn't available in time for the meeting pack. As usual, the department has reported on 4 expenditure categories: non-ring-fenced resource DEL, ring-fenced resource DEL, capital DEL and FTC. Detailed tables broken down by category and department have been provided as usual. The department has also provided detail on the impact of the revised 25-26 Outturn and Forecast Outturn guidance, which issued to departments on 10th November, specifically information in relation to the Department of Health and the Department of Education. In line with the new guidance, these departments have combined resource DEL overspends of 439 million, 8 million I should say, in their October returns, confirming they expect to overspend against their agreed budget. In relation to overcommitments, departments are reporting overcommitments of 231 in non-ring-fenced resource DEL, which is a reduction of 481 million, 220 million of ring-fenced resource DEL, and 81 million in capital DEL. A detailed breakdown is provided at Annex A, beginning of page 87 of the tabled pack. So in relation to Outturn compared to monitoring position for non-ring-fenced resource DEL, departments are forecasting a total overspend of 423.7 million. The departmental positions are in Annex B at page 87 of the tabled pack. In addition to that, page 98, sorry, the table pack, in respect of ring-fenced resource DEL, departments are forecasting a net easement of 14.3 million. The departmental positions are set at Annex C at page 105 of the table pack. In capital DEL, departments are forecasting a total easement of 151 million. However, DFC increased its forecast easement, which would have brought the total easement to 162.8 million. The departmental positions are set out in Annex D, page 112 of the tabled pack. In FTC financial transactions capital, all departments are forecasting outturns in line with their monitoring positions, which is commendable. Pleased to see that. That is at Annex E, at page 119 of the tabled pack. Expectations for variance exceeding the threshold of 5% and 250 grand are at Annex F. So members, first of all, are we agreed to forward all this information to other committees? I presume we are. And secondly, happy to take members' views on what we have in front of us and agree follow-up action. The first follow-up action I would like to agree, and maybe we may have this information by the time of the next meeting. I hope we do. I would like to find out, first of all, when the December monitoring round is going to be. It'll be December by the next time we meet. But we only have 2 meetings left before the end of the year. If we aren't going to have a document to scrutinise, so first of all, I understand the department is under pressure to turn around both the December monitoring round and a multi-year budget. I understand that some of the information that was released today in the budget will have some of a bearing, but only a bit of a bearing. I mean, it's not fundamentally reordering where things are. But I would like to understand when we're going to get the December monitoring round and, of course, the multi-year budget. I think, by implication, I'm now resigning myself to us not getting the multi-year budget before we have our last meeting in this committee. But I certainly would be disappointed if we were not getting the December monitoring round with the ability to talk about it in this committee and scrutinise it before the end of the year. I think it would be very concerning if the December monitoring round came out on, for example, the Friday after the Minister was here. I think that would look bad, because I think it would be bizarre to wait 24 or 48 hours and then publish something that clearly would have been in the works and close to being finalised before the Finance Committee met the Minister in question. Ideally, it would be published with an oral statement to the Assembly, which would enable all members to ask questions of the Minister, and also about the position, including the post-budget position and the multi-year budget position. So there's that. We also, obviously, as part of that, want to get a sense of, so we have a forecast overspend of 400 million. How much of that will be, excuse me, eased by by what's been announced today? A bit, but not all. How much of the overspend is the Department of Health pay settlement, and all of that? But I'll bring all the members in now. Deputy Chair, first of all.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think in the chamber, was it yesterday, I had asked the Finance Minister in and around the fact that there's multiple things going on, and I thought he made it quite clear that there's 2 separate things that I'd be bringing forward, the multi-year budget and the December monitoring round. So I think that, for us and the immediate financial pressures, I would agree it's important that we get the answer in the December monitoring round. And given that he is here on the 10th of December and then we go into recess, it seems entirely reasonable that we would expect to see something before then. But I just wonder if, whenever we're asking around that, have we any clarity on any further monitoring rounds later in the year? Because obviously we're here now at the end of November, a couple of weeks out from recess. There's been...
This will be the final one, Chair. The Department had confirmed the December monitoring round would be there'd be no January monitoring round.
And there'll be none then at the end of the year either.
They basically had said that there would usually been an October and a January. Their position is this is, rather than October and January, just a December.
Okay. I think, Chair, just with there being so much movement around it, so obviously you've said you would want to see it sooner rather than later. It feels like there's so much going on that I wonder, is the one monitoring round actually sufficient? Because there's a lot of things that have moved, and just reading through the details of this, we have a lot of significant easements, including things around the A5, a lot of projects that aren't commencing, big numbers coming through, so that'll all get picked up in this monitoring round. Then obviously we've got the consequences off the budget, and this is also the first time that the outturn figures have been reported under the new guidance, where we've got overspend versus overcommitments, and bringing all of that together, in the next couple of weeks with that monitoring round, we want to see what it looks like. But I would be surprised if this is the position of all the departments really crystallising now in December. I just would be a wee bit concerned that there being no further monitoring round, because it feels like there's a lot going on here.
Chair, in the past, the officials have talked about there is potential for open movement. The monitoring rounds tend to be the big shakedowns, if you like. So there'll be another realignment come spring supplementary estimates, which will have allowed further movements, I suppose, to have taken place early in the new year. They can then be ratified through that. But we seek clarification. The statement that we'd had from officials previously was that this would be because of the closeness, there wouldn't be a January monitoring round this would cover. But we'll seek further clarification of how any further movement will be managed.
And Chair, just finally on that, if the statement was pushing towards the end of that week where we've gone into recess, and we wouldn't have the opportunity to question it in the House, even if it was late in that week, and we still had it before the Minister was here on the 10th of December, at least this committee would have the chance to interrogate it, so it would definitely be preferable.
I totally agree. I completely agree. I mean, there are very high number of overcommitments as well, and I think it's with all these things, it's helpful to understand and unpack. I think sometimes the public get a bit confused by overcommitments. Obviously, overcommitments are different to overspends, and I think it's important for us to interrogate that. And the Minister himself is on the record as saying that the department should not be either overspending or overcommitting in principle, but there's a structural question I think we're going to have to continue to press, which is about the appropriateness of overcommitting and whether overcommitting is used at times as a tactical device by departments for negotiating purposes. Heaven forbid the idea, but I certainly think I would like to be able to interrogate. I'd like to be able to interrogate a monitoring round as and when one comes. So I think that's the urgent question you need to ask.
Chair, we'll also have the next outturn data in our second week in January. That'll give a clear indication at a very late stage in the financial year of where departments are at as well. But we'll clarify whether there's any further movement, whether the position has remained the same.
Okay. Any other members wish to come in at this point?
Else has indicated.
No. Okay. So what we will do we routinely share those outturn data with others? No, we don't bother with the departments.
No, we do. We share everything with the other staff committees.
Okay.
It's an opportunity for them to see what we see. They can ask for it themselves. But at the minute, Chair, this committee is kind of taking the lead on the example of what can be done with the data.
Okay.
Chair, if I could, just when we're sharing this outturn information, just would propose that it would be useful if you could circulate that guidance that came through on the 10th of
we did that already, Chair.
Yeah,
We've done that already.
Just alongside it, just to say here's your information, and just remember to look at it in light of the new guidance.
Because there's that useful passage, Chair, where it makes very clear to departments they need to differentiate between an overcommitment and an overspend. Helpfully in red as track changes.
Just as we're writing to other committees, Chair, because I know everybody
we'll
loves to get into the detail.
Yeah. Brian, Chair, as well.
Brian,
just in terms of the budget announcement today, do we know, are there any conditions on the 370 million, or is that?
I think that's the question. Those are the questions we need to ask. Generally speaking,
is it for the executive to decide? Yeah.
Generally speaking, when they give an overall number, there's a degree of discretion. It's not ring fence.
It's mostly going to be at the executive's discretion. It might have even said that in some of the articles so far.
It'll have to, it's restricted in the sense that the amount of capital and the amount of DEL will have to be. You can't mix and match those two, but you can. Beyond that, they won't have to spend them on the same. They're part of consequentials which arise from spending in England, so they don't have to be spent on the same things they're spent on in England. Okay. So, members, if we're agreed on that, we will be getting that additional information, and we hope the Finance Minister will be giving an update anyway. And if possible, I don't know if we have it in. Is it worth us asking to see if there's any official who can come and give us an oral briefing next week on the budget, if any of them are...
We've asked for a written readout because we would have expected that would happen with the... We do expect the Minister to make an announcement or to make an oral statement. So we'll get a readout of that. Helpfully, the department last time sent us...
I think we had Joanne McBurney the last time, did we? No, Joanne McBurney.
No, we got a written briefing.
Okay.
Now, Joanne was up fairly soon after. I'm trying to think.
We do have the Minister the week after. So
whether we have Joanne coming with the Minister, no? Okay, we did send the list.
Sure.
The list included budget. First of which was budget and written in large letters. So we would anticipate that will be relevant officials, but we will see. We should get confirmation of that fairly soon. Or not, judging by Clúda's face, maybe not. But we would like it very soon. Yeah, we would like it very soon. Well, yeah, they should be able to make a decision on that. But yeah, the members will be able to interrogate that more. We would hope the Minister will have made an oral statement early on next week. That should come with a readout of the budget, because that usually, those two accompany each other. And then we can find out what's going on with the December monitoring. As we'd said before, departmental returns had to be in last Thursday the 20th. And it's usually a reasonably quick time scale because there'd be discussion beforehand. So we would anticipate December monitoring being released before the end of the term. But again, the committee has agreed to have a good push on getting a timescale for that.
Okay, members content? Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll move on. Agenda item 11, correspondence. 11.1 is the NISRA annual report 2024. That's at page 230 of the meeting pack. NISRA has formally laid the Registrar General's annual report for 2024. That's just a note. 11.2 is from the Public Accounts Committee. And it's to note that the PAC has published a report on excess votes. There were no excess votes in 24-25, but there was one excess vote relating to late accounts from the Department of Education Teachers Pension Scheme, which breached its net resource limit in 23-24 by just over 9 million. This excess was primarily attributable to an overestimation of contribution receipts to the scheme, due mainly to uncertainty around the teachers' pay deal. Okay. 11.3 is the Communities Committee, Children's Services Corporation Act, Northern Ireland 2015. Members, that's at page 129 of the table pack. The Communities Committee has agreed to request a joint briefing from the Department of Communities and Finance on cross-departmental work related to the application of the Children's Services Corporation Act 2015. We were copied in as a courtesy, to note. 11.4 is also from the Communities Committee, and it relates to a partnership agreement between the government and the voluntary community sector. The Communities Committee has written, it's at page 132 of the table pack, the Communities Committee has written to the Department of Finance regarding fair funding principles. The committee has been copied into the correspondence as a courtesy and can expect to see the response in due course. Members are content. Agenda item 12 is the draft forward work programme. That's at page 275, the briefing pack. I think it's worth just saying we have next week, our main item is the Fiscal Council bill. We have the Ulster University Economic Policy people and Pivotal. And is there anything else next week that in terms of oral sessions that we need?
Yeah, we have, and that we're going to get Andrew McAvoy's coming up for that. So we have the 4 SL1s that we were anticipating, 5 SL1s we were anticipating around the rates.
Yeah, I think it's worth then us, we will be obviously asking him about the status of the rates changes that were announced and when they're going to be implemented. And then obviously in the 10th of December, before we break up for Christmas, we have the Minister himself. But other points, Clark is going to put us in.
Sure, there's not a huge amount else to say. We're now scheduling in a fair bit for January in terms of looking at deliberating on the Fiscal Council bill. We largely will have finished oral evidence on that one. Then during January we're also going to look at having officials from other departments to come up and talk about the Administrative and Financial Provisions bill. So the ideal is deliberations and potential thoughts around amendments for Fiscal Council will take place during January. More evidence on administrative and financial provisions during January, and then in February we should be able to get to the deliberation point for that one too. Deputy Chair.
Deputy Chair.
Yeah, sorry, can I just revise? What date have we got our consideration stage up to? Is it the end of February or was it March?
It's the 27th of March for both.
Okay, yeah.
For both. We went for the same date for both.
Yeah, no, just checking, sorry.
We've sort of managed them in a staggered way, but with the anticipation we've now scheduled through, and we think we'll be fine. I shouldn't say things like that out loud, should I? It's incredibly provocative.
No, just as you're talking, it was
we should be okay with that. As I say, the administrative financial provisions, it is very much focused on officials from other departments. We don't have a lot of stakeholder groups coming through on that one because it's not an obvious bill with an obvious title, if you know what I mean. So you don't get a lot of response on bills like that. It needs to be someone who's really got into the policy, and that's why it's more useful through the other committees and departments.
Okay. Thank you very much. And no other comments on the forward work programme? I presume members are agreed that we publish it on the committee website. Okay. Agenda item 13, any other business? Does anybody have any other business? Okay, none from me. So 14 is date, time and place of next meeting. We are scheduled to meet here next week, Wednesday 3rd of December at 2 p.m. Enjoy the 2 p.m. starts before Christmas.
That's the other thing I should say.
Starting
Those
in the new
will
year
change
and back to a few 1 p.m. starts in order to get some business done, but you can enjoy them in the run-up to Christmas. I'm going to put the question to the committee now adjourned. Committee's now adjourned.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber, 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 Signed. Senate Chamber. 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 Sound. 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 Senate chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber. sound.